Hello, everybody. All for All is a podcast produced by me, Richard Eskow, in collaboration with Democracy at Work. It's a place where we explore history, science, and culture to imagine what a better world, that is to say, a post capitalist world, might look like and how we might get there. This series is founded on the belief that our technological imaginations have far outraced our social imaginations, leaving us at the mercy of the exploitative few. A quick comment before we begin. Our topic today is the billionaire hijacking of human space exploration. And it's impossible to fully address that topic without talking about an anti human spin on the philosophy known nowadays as long-termism. That's worthy of an entire conversation of its own. But briefly, first of all, long-termism as an idea is a good one, right? I mean, we want to think about the impact of what we do today on future generations of humans, and I would say future generations of all living things. I was very impressed, for example, when I interviewed a radical Buddhist monk from Sri Lanka who said that he and his colleagues had a 500-year plan for that country. Long-termism is that taken to the most extreme and hypothetical, talking about a future where humanity might expand into thousands of planets, trillions of human beings, many of whom are living a digital existence uploaded to a computer, and so on. And as we'll talk about later today in this upcoming half hour, there's enormous danger with that. It leads you to, among other things, eugenics and the trading of a hypothetical human being today, allowing them to die for, I'm sorry, trading of a real human being today for a million hypothetical human beings tomorrow. So it can become messianic and, frankly, evil. But that doesn't mean we can't dream or we can't imagine. Those of us who long for and work for a more humane future, of course we can dream. We can even imagine that technologies that seem impossible now might become possible one day, faster than light travel or artificial planets or what have you. But we have to ground ourselves in reality as we understand it. First of all, my approach to looking at the future is to understand the future. You have to keep both feet in the present. We also have to understand, those of us who want a better world, what the billionaires involved in this enterprise fully understand, which is when we change the future, we change the present. Now, with all that said, our story of billionaires in space, in a sense, begins as all human stories do, which is to say, in the past. Historians say that Cleopatra and Mark Antony once made a bet to see who could hold the most expensive feast. After Mark Antony served a lavish meal that everybody was, blown away by, frankly, Cleopatra responded by taking her most valuable pearl earring, crushing it into a wine goblet filled with vinegar, and drinking it down. In a sense, the dream of space flight, which was once intended to unite not only all Americans but all of humanity, has become a race to see who can squander the most money, except that this time it's the rest of us who'll be drinking down the dregs. The hijacking of space and space exploration by billionaires and their corporations has disastrous implication for this planet's future and perhaps for other planets' futures as well. Everything that we struggle with today, war, climate destruction, inequality, media manipulation, with their efforts to take over the exploration of outer space, they're pushing them all into the final frontier. In other words, we've met the alien invaders and they are us. Well, not us, them, the billionaires. Before we go any further into it, I want to say that there was a time when, even here in the United States, it was understood that this world of space exploration was not supposed to be any private corporations' way of reaping profits, much less the plaything of a few addled and spoiled billionaires. Of all things, I got insight into this when first my mother and then my aunt passed away, and my grandmother. I had to go through their things. There were some things packed up by my grandmother in 1962. My grandmother, by the way, who moved to this country from France and never liked it here, but that's a whole other conversation. So I was unpacking her things, and one of them, a vase or something, was wrapped in, well, most of them were wrapped in the San Francisco Chronicle because they lived in the Bay Area. But this one caught my eye. This headline: Truman hits Bill as Telstar giveaway. Now, you'll remember that Telstar was a satellite system that was also the subject of a great instrumental rock and roll classic from the 1960s. But the article says this was, of course, at this point, John F. Kennedy had been president. This was in August of 1962. So John F. Kennedy had been president for roughly a year and a half. Harry Truman had been out of office since January of 1953. So less than 10 years. And first of all, just from a political standpoint, it's amusing. Truman's trying to walk the line here. It says, Harry S. Truman today denounced the communications satellite bill backed by the Kennedy administration as, quote unquote, a gigantic giveaway. However, the former president emphasized that he is finding no fault with President Kennedy, in fact, supports him heartily. And then, quote, I just don't think the president understands this bill, end quote, Truman told a reporter. Well, that is, in fact, a backslap, a slap in the face for one politician to say about another. But Harry Truman, who's no angel, who has had a couple of war crimes under his belt and needlessly initiated the Cold War, he got something right here. He says, and I quote, the public spent 25 or 30 billion dollars developing satellites, and the communication systems ought to be publicly owned, end quote. Can you imagine any Democratic politician saying that today? As we'll talk about, they certainly do the opposite. The Republicans, Truman went on to blame the Republicans, although some Democrats are going along with it. But emphasized several times he's a backer of the Kennedy administration. Of course, what that bill would have done, by the way, is create a private entity, a corporation, to own and operate the United States' share of a global communication system, a worldwide communication system. So it was an international project. That stock under this plan would be half owned by the public and half by the telecommunications companies. And Harry S. Truman and a lot of other people didn't like that half that was going to be owned by telecommunications companies. Why should they get billions of dollars of value from the public activity of the United States government? Of course, we don't think like that anymore. And restraining it, keeping it to half private ownership, would itself seem radical today. That's how much we've changed. So what about the billionaires who are now taking over the process of space exploration for the United States, at least, and most of the West? Well, we talked about Cleopatra's earring. Let's talk about that time when the billionaires all decided they were going to race, the billionaire boys were all decided they were going to race each other into space. Remember, and the Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos launching themselves into private space trips around the same time. Branson played dress up in a uniform, so-called. It was made to look like a uniform, but it really just made it seem like he was an extra on the set of Galaxy Quest. Frankly, if you look at the picture, I'd be embarrassed for him, except that nobody will ever tell him how stupid he looks because he's a billionaire, so he'll never know. nor will anybody have the nerve to tell him that he's a self-indulgent parasite, a space age Nero fiddling with space toys while the world burns. But that was one emperor's new rocket. Another was, of course, Jeff Bezos, whose rocket was, shall we say, a Freudian nightmare in design, and who is eager to now exploit space travel on his own behalf. Elon Musk, of course, famously launched Tesla into space just to show he can. In a way, I consider that lordly and imperial gesture to be a monumental, forgive my language, but a monumental fuck you to the struggling people on this planet who are not named Elon or Bezos or Branson. That's the thing about billionaires, though. They take from the world's government, but I'm sorry, they take from the world's governments, but they belong to no country. They are politically as well as physically soaring above earthly borders. Branson, for example, may be British, but his real citizenship is in that principality of the ultra wealthy few who call the shots for the rest of us. This image of him celebrating his victory over common sense is a snapshot of empire. So, by the way, it was Branson's decision not to fly to the so-called Kármán line, which is the generally accepted boundary of outer space. That's 62 miles above sea level. He only went 50 miles, but what does he care? Outer space is wherever he says it is. And besides, NASA gave him or I'm sorry, the FAA gave him astronaut wings. So he's an official astronaut now, even though he didn't do anything. You know, all those wings, all the other awards, uniforms, and absurd symbolism these people make for themselves, they're the 21st century equivalent of, I don't know, the tigers' heads that used to be stuffed and mounted on the walls of minor officials of the British Raj. They're meaningless and empty trophies of a non-victory because, of course, what they used to do at tiger hunts in those days was drug the tiger. The poor creature would stagger out into the forest, and Sahib would shoot it and think he's conquered nature. It's all paper mache fantasy for people who dress their privilege in gilded uniforms and call it courage. Take the name of Branson's company, Virgin Galactic, he calls it. The galaxy is a pretty large place, and he's only done a suborbital flight. That's like an ant walking a quarter of the way across a leaf and calling it an interplanetary voyage. But the hype, along with the waste and the vanity, is the point. Branson says he wants to start a space tourism business. There must be a few thousand people who will pay $250,000 to ride his airplane. Unfortunately, two of his best customers are setting up their own space companies, so they won't go. By the way, as these guys flew their rockets into suborbital space, I collected a few stories about the planet they were soaring above. U.S. Forest Service captured video of a fire whirl, which is, I quote, a spinning vortex column of ascending hot air and gases rising from a fire, end quote, at the Tennant Fire in Klamath National Forest in Oregon. Spinning vortex column of ascending hot air is also what happens when these guys talk. But fire whirls, which are called firenadoes, are not to be confused with pyro CB firestorms. There was one of them while these guys were flying too in British Columbia. They can generate thunder, lightning, and tornado force winds. While Branson and then Bezos were flying, it was 130 degrees Fahrenheit in Death Valley, likely the hottest anywhere on Earth since they began keeping records up to that point. It is now, we've had hotter years since then and continue to have hotter years. We're expected to have yet another breaking hot year in the next 3 to 4 years. Also, by the way, more than 1 billion sea creatures were killed in British Columbia, according to a marine biologist's calculations. They were cooked to death by the heat wave that Branson soared above. Methane emissions were up. California, of course, had a record-breaking year of wildfires that year, and in 2024 had the devastating fires in the Los Angeles area. And hunger has been soaring as these guys flew. And since then, in 2020 alone, 750 million people faced hunger, and 2.36 billion people lacked access to adequate food. 12% of the world's population was severely food insecure. But these guys did nothing but waste, 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 tossing a Tesla into space, everything else they tried to do absurd. 22% of children under 5 years of age were affected by stunting. 45 million children were suffering from wasting, and 40 million or so were overweight. Then came the COVID pandemic. Now, as long as we're talking about waste, let's talk about Elon Musk. Elon Musk thinks he's going to get to Mars, even though his so-called self-driving cars have trouble getting across North Phoenix without hurting somebody. He wants to spend trillions of dollars on a trip to a hot and arid world with an unbreathable atmosphere when he could save his money and just drive to Palmdale instead. But the spending, the waste, is a big part of the point for these guys. That's why the Tesla was launched into space. They want to show that they can waste more than any government on earth can spend. And who put an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos into this position? Of course, Bezos became a billionaire with Amazon, which took advantage of its tax-free status in order to become a giant corporation. That is to say, freedom from sales tax. That was what gave it a leadership position among all other corporations, plus all the concessions that local and state governments have given it. Not to mention the fact that all these guys have built their empires on computer technology, iPhones, the internet, other forms of phone communication, all of which has been developed by the government, all of which they've exploited for personal use. Elon Musk, an analysis by the Washington Post found that Musk and his firms had received $38 billion in the form of government contracts, loans, subsidies, and tax credits over more than 2 decades. 2/3 of that 38 billion was done in the last 5 years, since 2020, meaning most of it under a Democratic president. And then you could also throw in at least 6.3 trillion from local and other governments, and the total amount is probably way, way larger. This leaves out classified defense and intelligence work, which means that our deepest secrets and vulnerabilities are in the hands of a lunatic. Let's see, I won't go through all these, but he's on track to get 12 billion more. And it's not just how much he got, it's when he got it. NASA rescued SpaceX when it was collapsing, as it should have been allowed to collapse, over its incompetence. In March 2006, its first rocket shut itself down, stopped firing less than a minute into the flight. What did NASA do? Gave it a contract worth $250 million and rescued it. Just months after that, they finally reached, 2 years after that, they finally reached orbit, and NASA gave them a $1.6 billion contract. So there wouldn't even be a SpaceX if not for the US government. We could go on, but SpaceX has been valued at more than $21 billion. It's changing constantly with Trump's relationship to Musk, but it does change constantly. Tesla has been the same way, but Tesla is a little bit out of our scope right now. Let's also talk about the militarization of space, shall we? And let's start with this. Let's start with something called the United States Space Force. Here's their anthem. Okay, so let's talk now about, I hope you're inspired by that anthem. Let's talk about the militarization of outer space and what that has to do with billionaires. First of all, we know that defense contracting, so-called military contracting, is the most lucrative enterprise known to humanity here in the United States. So by blurring the line between military spending and space science, they are able to basically get all restrictions and limitations off their spending. A lot of it isn't even known to the public how much is being spent because nobody, Democratic or Republican, is going to hamper spending on military applications in space or in Yemen or anywhere else. So, what are the problems with militarizing space? Well, first of all, you're blurring the line between civilian and military applications. So you don't really know what we're investing in when we invest in, as a nation, in this technology and in this kind of engineering research. Of course, you can conceal military advancements and actions and costs from the public, which further reduces our paltry democratic oversight and allows the military to operate in even more profound secrecy than it does today. Arms control agreements, which neither party seems particularly interested in right now in this country. How can you enforce them when you don't even know whether there's military spending going on? As we said, lack of transparency or accountability, and no possibility of real oversight, especially when we allow this work to be done by private enterprise that claims it can't disclose its trade secrets to the public that is paying for those trade secrets. Now, you may be saying, well, sure, that's the Republicans, and it is. But what about the Democrats? Well, here's an initiative that was pushed under President Biden. One headline reads, U.S. military is strengthening ties with commercial space industry to prevent hackers targeting satellites. Now, of course, any technology that prevents hackers from targeting satellites could also conceivably be used to hack the rest of us. But this is part of a new partnership that was developed under Biden called the Commercial Augmentation Space Reserve, or CASR, which they cheered on in an April 2024 U.S. Space Force report. I'll read a little bit from you because it shows how the billionaires and a hyper-capitalist class have taken things over. The nation and the world have seen a renaissance in space with unprecedented innovation emerging in commercial and allied space systems in the past decade. Unfortunately, this renaissance has been accompanied by the emergence of strategic competitors, meaning China mostly, I guess. We must seize the opportunity to capitalize on significant, innovative commercial space solutions. Again, this Biden administration, we must tap into the spirit of American entrepreneurship, innovation, and vibrant competitive markets to be successful and sustain our competitive advantage across the spectrum of conflict in the era of great power competition. Now, end quote. First of all, why is there a great power competition? Why don't we collaborate? And secondly, just to be clear, the spectrum of conflict includes companies that are not owned by billionaires like Musk or Bezos or Branson making money out of outer space. When they say spectrum of conflict, they mean economic conflict as well. Now, again, continuing from the press release or the report, as Secretary of Defense Austin, again, Biden's Secretary of Defense, stated, quote, integrating commercial solutions as opposed to merely augmenting existing government systems will require a shift in approach within the Department of Defense, and subquote, meaning that you generals better get damn used to answering to billionaires and paying billionaires for things you're already doing them yourselves. And in case you don't believe that that's what he means, they go on to say I'll find it in a second. We will integrate when feasible and cost effective. We will integrate commercial space solutions to deliver technological innovations, commercial, private enterprise, that supplement or supplant, that is, add to or replace existing government capabilities. In other words, the United States Space Force under Biden is saying things that your government can do now. Obviously, we're hyper militarized. I don't even have the time to go into that. We're going to give to billionaires to do instead. We're going to put in billionaires' hands. That's what they're really saying. Then they end by saying we will leverage American industrial strength to counter threats to our advantage in space. We owe it to American forces putting their lives on the line, to American businesses developing solutions to outpace the adversary, and to the American taxpayers expecting us to get the most of their dollar. Grammatically incorrect. It is signed Semper Supra, Semper Supra. That's the Latin for always above. And that's, of course, you heard the official marching song of the United States Space Force. And they actually had the lunacy to sign this document, Semper Supra, with an exclamation point at the end. Now, what happens when you take this kind of capability and put it in private hands? Well, for example, reports started coming out in 2023 that Musk, who described as a linchpin of U.S. space efforts, had been in regular contact with Russian President Vladimir Putin since late 2022. And people were very upset about that, including the fact that at one point Elon Musk unilaterally decided that he was not going to allow Ukrainian forces who were attacking a Russian base to access Starlink at all. Now, I don't want to get into the war in Ukraine. That's another topic too. But I also don't want to. I don't think it was a good idea to do that. But I also don't want billionaires deciding when, where, and how we're going to use public resources, the people's resources, to respond to what was, after all, a war crime, the invasion of Ukraine, regardless of the events that led up to it in the context which we've talked about. It should not be up to one person, because the government has become so dependent on him, to decide what we're going to do or not do. As this one report said, the problem is that the government has become, quote, I'll quote the report, the government faces a dilemma because it is so dependent on the billionaires' technologies. SpaceX launches vital national security satellites into orbit and is the company NASA relies on to transport astronauts to and from the International Space Station. And what do? As we now know, we decide under then President Biden and current President Trump to make us more dependent on billionaires and private resources and corporations, whether it's Musk or, because of his feud with Trump, somebody else. Now, this is as far as possible from the vision that this country was preparing to embrace in the early 1960s. Something that gets overlooked is the fact that in an address to the United States, to the United Nations in 1963, John F. Kennedy proposed a joint mission to the moon between the United States and the Soviet Union. Now, when he took office, things were very tense between the US and the USSR. He talked about a space race. But by the time 1963 came along, they'd had some diplomatic breakthroughs, resolved the Cuban Missile Crisis, put in a hotline, banned open air testing of nuclear weapons. And not to mention the trip was getting expensive. So Kennedy proposed that the two countries mutually go to the moon, which was a great idea. The Soviets didn't respond initially. Kennedy, of course, was assassinated in November 1963. Lyndon Johnson dropped the idea. We learned, according to Khrushchev's son, at least, he was planning to accept the offer before Kennedy was killed and the offer was withdrawn. Now, let's talk about the further future before we go. First of all, let's establish something right away. We're not going to Mars. We think we are, but there's no logic to it at this point or in any conceivable near-term technology. The Mars, just to make it clear, temperatures typically reach minus 81 degrees Fahrenheit. It would not be a place anyone could breathe without spacesuits or a completely enclosed habitat because the planet's air is about 95% carbon dioxide. Oh, let's see. What else can we tell you about Mars? Well, it's really far away and really expensive to get there. And of course, the moon is even less hospitable. And just a little logic test about it inhabiting Mars. Antarctica, for example, is a far more habitable environment for human beings than Mars is, even though it's pretty bad. But if we haven't moved into Antarctica, if we haven't built cities and colonies and new nations in Antarctica, what makes you think we would go all the way across the void of space to Mars, to paraphrase H.G. Wells, to live under even harsher conditions? This is Musk and his cohort may believe this fantasy, but it will remain a fantasy, as we say, under current technology. It's just a way to distract us from what they're doing to us here at home as well. Now, as I said earlier, and oh, by the way, I want to say too that if we had a space colony run by Bezos or Musk, we can guarantee it would pretty much be like an Amazon warehouse with every move monitored and unsafe working conditions and everything else. So we can pretty much dismiss that fantasy, except for what we might call the long term, right? The real long term. Let's say, for example, that we create terraforming technology. That is to say, technology that allows us to recreate a planet's ecology in a way that becomes more humanly habitable. Well, as this map shows, we still wouldn't have that much space. This shows all the available space on Earth. And if you're listening, obviously you can't see it. But yeah, we'd get a few times more square mileage than we have right now, but it wouldn't change the ultimate destiny of humanity. It wouldn't allow us to become trillions of people. You know what would? Interstellar space, but that is absolutely beyond the range of current technologies, unless you go for unmanned technologies like Stephen Hawking's idea of a tiny robotic spacecraft that could travel at one-fifth the speed of light. That could work, but that's not going to create trillions of humans unless you upload them into a tiny piece of digital technology, also way beyond our abilities. So even with terraforming, maybe Mars we could do it, maybe Venus we could do it, but Mercury with its intense heat and cold, no. Pluto, no. The asteroid belt, no. Highly unlikely. It would make more sense to stop de-terraforming Earth, or should we call that terra deforming Earth, by ending our addiction to destructive fuels and technologies. That's something we know how to do. We have the skill, we just don't have the will, thanks to these billionaires who are hijacking outer space. When billionaires direct the exploration and use of space and plan to reap the profits from it, the ideology of the private sector offers only imaginary hope and ignores a basic fact that there is no planet B. Now, if we talk about some future where there are trillions of humans, well, again, highly hypothetical. Some Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction writer, said that any technology that's sufficiently advanced from us will seem like magic. So maybe we'll have that kind of technology someday if we survive, but the billionaires are a threat to our survival. And not every technology that humanity's ever imagined has come true. For example, alchemy. We still can't turn lead into gold for all the other things we can do. So we can't depend on miraculous breakthroughs, but it's certainly clear that if there are going to be many billions more human beings in the future, we don't want them living under the thumbs of these billionaires. As a closing thought, Cleopatra's empire fell not long after her death. It was torn apart, as so many empires are, by inequality, decadent rulers, rebellions of slaves and other workers. Will this empire go the same route? Well, I wouldn't be surprised. It certainly shares the excesses and irrationalities and brutalities of its predecessors, but history always has the last word. Meanwhile, the next time a billionaire launches himself or some other celebrities into space, the media will replay the video over and over. The rocket's glare will grow smaller and smaller on your screens in the morning sky until it looks like nothing so much as a pearl earring dissolving in a goblet of wine. As always, thanks for listening. And as always, I welcome your comments.